All right, ready to hit the trails. This deep dive is taking us to Sydney, specifically the Greater Sydney Bike Trail.
220 kilometers of cycling adventure.
You seem pretty excited about this one. And I have to admit, I'm intrigued too. Especially since you sent over all this material. We've got a video of some guy doing the whole thing in a single day.
Yeah.
Articles from the Sydney Morning Herald, Ride On magazine, even stuff from Bicycle NSW. They're a cycling advocacy group, right?
They are.
And of course, Cycle Sydney, which is like the Trail Creators website, right?
Satirically.
So we've got a lot to cover. And really, our mission here is to help you, dear listener, decide if this is something you want to tackle.
Because it is a challenge.
Right. And, one of the things that jumped out at me reading through all this is how this trail kind of challenges this idea that Sydney is just a car city.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you think about Sydney and you think about the Opera House, the Harbour Bridge, all that.
Right.
But this trail takes you to a completely different side of the city.
Yeah, and it's not just us saying that.
Yeah.
Even Cadel Evans, Tour de France winner.
Yeah.
He was quoted in the Sydney Morning Herald saying, "Sydney's a tough city to ride in. Like, the streets are too narrow, too much traffic."
It can be intimidating, that's for sure.
But the Greater Sydney Bike Trail really tries to address that.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly off-road, dedicated bike paths.
Yeah, and it's not just a random collection of paths. This was very carefully planned out. This guy, Garry Robinson, he's the one who created this whole thing.
Oh, interesting.
And Ride On magazine talks about how he was inspired by New Zealand's rail trails. So those are like these really scenic bike paths that follow old railway lines.
So he brought that same concept to Sydney.
Exactly. He took all these existing paths in Sydney and found ways to link them together to create this 220-kilometer loop.
Wow. And you've got options too, right?
Yeah.
There's the full 230-kilometer Greater Sydney Bike Trail.
Yeah.
Or there's a slightly shorter one, the Sydney 150.
Yeah, only 150 kilometers.
That one's a little less intimidating maybe. But either way, you're mostly off-road, according to the Cycle Sydney.
That's the beauty of it. You're away from traffic, you're enjoying the scenery.
Now, one thing I thought was pretty cool is this whole 4 markers concept. So you have to hit these 4 landmarks. Centennial Park, the Woronora Bridge, Lizard Log, which is in the Western Sydney Parklands, and then Lane Cove National Park.
It's a great way to break up the journey.
Yeah. So it's almost like a scavenger hunt built in.
It gives you something to aim for.
Yeah.
You reach one marker, you feel a sense of accomplishment, and then you're on to the next one.
I love that. Now, it sounds like there's some pretty amazing sights along the way.
Oh, absolutely.
The Sydney Morning Herald article and the YouTube video both mention this wooden bike path that runs under the Woronora Bridge.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of that. It looks incredible. Can you imagine cycling under a massive bridge like that?
Yeah, that sounds pretty unique.
Definitely not something you see every day.
And the Herald article also talked about how stunning the waterfront riding is around Dolls Point and Botany Bay.
Oh yeah, those views.
Ocean views, salty breezes, that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Sounds amazing. But you know what really caught my eye?
What's that?
Ride On magazine mentioned this place called the City Farm at Abbotsbury.
Oh yeah.
Apparently, you can see sheep, goats, and cows right there in the middle of your ride.
Right in the city. It's crazy.
I love that. So, I'm already starting to see the appeal of this trail, but I know you're really keen on the idea of doing the whole 220 kilometers in a day.
Oh yeah.
And the YouTube video shows it's definitely possible. This guy did it in 13 and a half hours.
He did. He was a pretty experienced rider though.
Right. So we should probably talk about the logistics of that. Like, is that something just anyone can jump into?
Yeah.
Or does it require some serious planning?
We definitely need to unpack that.
All right, so let's dive into all those details in the next part.
Let's do it.
But before we move on, what's standing out to you so far as the most appealing part of this trail?
And for you listening, I'm curious, how does that 220-kilometer distance make you feel? Is it exciting, daunting, maybe a bit of both? So you want to tackle the whole 220 kilometers in a day?
It's definitely tempting. But even with all the off-road paths, that's a lot of time in the saddle.
It is. And honestly, even if you are super fit, I wouldn't recommend just jumping in and trying to do the whole thing in one go.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the alternative?
Well, remember those 4 markers we talked about. They're not just there to help you navigate, they can actually make the whole thing a lot more manageable.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Cycle Sydney talks about using the train system to your advantage.
So you could, say, ride from Centennial Park to the Woronora Bridge and then hop on a train back to your starting point.
Exactly. Call it a day, rest up, and then do another section the next day.
That's a great idea. It breaks the whole thing down into smaller, more manageable chunks.
And Bicycle NSW actually has a list of train stations that are really close to the trail.
Are perfect. So you can plan your route around those stations.
Exactly. It makes it super convenient to break up the ride.
Okay, that definitely takes some of the pressure off.
Yeah.
But what about navigating the trail itself? Because the Sydney Morning Herald article mentioned that some parts aren't well signposted.
Yeah, that's something to be aware of. Garry Robinson, the guy who created the trail, he's actually pushing for better signage.
Okay, good to know.
But for now, yeah, you definitely need a GPS.
Right, with a route downloaded.
All of our sources really stress that.
Got it. GPS, check. But okay, we're talking a full day of riding, potentially. What kind of bike would you recommend for this? Because my legs are already aching just thinking about it.
I'd say a gravel bike is your best bet. Ride On Magazine really recommends them.
Okay. Why gravel specifically?
Well, they're designed for both paved and unpaved surfaces. And this trail has a mix of both, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And they're generally more comfortable than a road bike for longer rides.
Right, because they've got that more relaxed geometry.
Exactly. So you're not hunched over the handlebars the whole time.
Makes sense. And what about packing essentials? I mean, spare tubes, a pump, snacks, all that good stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely crucial.
That's a long way to go if you have a breakdown.
And that YouTube video, the guy who did it in a day, he really emphasized how important it is to be self-sufficient.
Yeah, you don't want to get stuck miles from anywhere with a flat tire.
Or no snacks.
Exactly.
Well,
I get hangry way before the 220-kilometer mark. Speaking of food, did any of the sources mention any good places to eat along the way?
Actually, yeah. The Sydney Morning Herald article mentioned a fantastic Vietnamese bakery in Revesby.
Oh, nice.
It's called Taste of Aromatic Bakery.
Taste of Aromatic Bakery. Okay, I'm writing that down.
They said the pork rolls and coffee there were amazing.
Ooh, that sounds like a perfect pit stop.
And hey, remember that city farm at Abbotsbury? It might be worth checking if they have any food options there too. Fresh produce or maybe some homemade treats.
Oh, that's a great idea. Okay, so we've got our route plan, we've got our bike, we've got snacks.
We're getting there.
But let's be real. 220 kilometers in a day. Even with train breaks, that sounds intense.
It's a challenge for sure.
So what factors should someone really consider before deciding if that's a realistic goal for them?
Well, I'd say the first thing is just being honest with yourself about your fitness level.
Right.
Have you done any really long rides before? Are you comfortable spending hours on a bike?
Yeah, because it's not just about being able to ride a bike, it's about endurance.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the weather in Sydney. It can get really hot, especially in the summer.
Oh yeah, that's true. Heat exhaustion is no joke.
And the mental aspect is huge too. Can you stay motivated for that long?
Because 13 and a half hours is a long time to be anywhere, let alone on a bike.
Exactly. That's why those 4 markers are so helpful. They give you these smaller goals to aim for, so it's not just this one massive, daunting challenge.
Right. It breaks it down into bite-sized pieces. So even if someone isn't ready for the full 220 kilometers in a day, they can still enjoy the trail.
Absolutely. They can do it in smaller chunks at their own pace and maybe work their way up to longer distances.
Okay, I love that. So for our listener who's aiming for that one-day challenge, what would you say are the biggest hurdles they'll need to overcome?
Well, training consistently is key. Building up that endurance is crucial. Being able to handle different types of terrain, and then being prepared for anything. Mechanical issues, weather changes, you name it.
So self-sufficiency is important.
Definitely. And that mental toughness we talked about. Being able to push through discomfort and stay focused.
Because 13.5 hours, no matter how beautiful the scenery is going to be a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
So it sounds like success on this trail really comes down to a combination of things. Physical preparation, mental fortitude, and planning.
Yeah. And maybe a little bit of luck wouldn't hurt either.
That's true. But even if luck isn't on their side, it sounds like this trail offers a really unique way to experience Sydney.
What aspects of this challenge are you finding most intriguing?
And for you listening, what resonates with you most about the idea of exploring a familiar city from a completely different perspective? All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have routes, logistics, training, even Vietnamese pork rolls.
You can't forget the pork rolls. But really, what's the big takeaway here? Why should someone consider doing the Greater Sydney Bike Trail? What makes it more than just another cycling challenge?
You know, for me, what's really fascinating is how this trail changes the way we think about Sydney.
How so?
It's not just about those iconic landmarks anymore, the Opera House, the Harbour Bridge. It's about discovering all these hidden gems and connections within the city, places you'd never find if you were just driving around.
Right. And that sense of discovery comes through in everything we've looked at, the YouTube video, the articles, even on Garry Robinson's website, Cycle Sydney.
Yeah. He talks about how people are always surprised by what they find along the trail.
Like that wooden bike path under the Warnora Bridge.
Exactly. Or stumbling upon a city farm in the middle of their ride.
It's like you're seeing Sydney with fresh eyes. Even if you've lived here your whole life. And I love how it connects you with other riders. That Facebook group sounds like a great resource for tips, for sharing stories, just for that sense of community.
Right. You're all in this together. You've all taken on this challenge.
And it really taps into this whole movement towards active transportation and sustainable tourism. You know, you're experiencing a city without relying on a car.
Yeah. You're getting exercise. You're being eco-friendly.
You're slowing down, taking in the sights and sounds.
It's a different pace of life, and I think that's something we could all benefit from.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling pretty inspired. This trail is more than just a physical challenge. It's a journey of discovery. It's a testament to human ingenuity, really. And it's a celebration of community. So if you're looking for a unique way to experience Sydney, or maybe you just need a little push to get out of your comfort zone, I'd say check out the Greater Sydney Bike Trail. We'll have links to all the sources in the show notes. And hey, maybe we'll even see you out there on the trail someday.
What are your final thoughts on the Greater Sydney Bike Trail after this deep dive?
And what about you, listener? What hidden adventures are waiting to be discovered right in your own backyard?